Call the Natural Resources Committee to order, please. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Roll call. Okay, we need to do a roll call of the committee, please. When I call your name, we'll start off with the Vice Chairman, Gerald Dawson.
Here.
Okay. Council members Logan Cunningham, York Glover,
Here.
Chris Herbershon.
Present.
Okay, and other members, we have Councilman, who else do we have? Councilman McAllen and Chairman Passmit.
And Mr. Somerville.
And then and Council Member Paul Somerville. Is that all the council members on board? Okay. All right.
Did you call out York?
Yes, I did. Oh, Councilman Glover. I called him out because he's a member of the committee, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. All right. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion. A public notification of this meeting was published and distributed in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. I would like to confirm that, please.
It was, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brock. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion of approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Dawson. Do I have a second? Okay, and Councilmember
second.
Glover, second? All right, without exception, we will approve the agenda as published. Number 5 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 5th, 2021 meeting. I have a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
All right, Councilman Dawson made a motion to approve the minutes. And a second by Councilmember Paul Somerville. All right. We do have some public comment I need to read into the record, but before I do that, is there any other public comment?
Just carry the motion through.
Oh, yes, sir. Sorry. Okay, so approval of the minutes without exception. All right, the minutes have been approved. I was jumping ahead. All right, number 6, citizen comment. Is there any other citizen comment besides what was sent to us in writing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, I will read this public comment. This item was taken off the agenda, but the groups that sent it would still like this read into the record. This is from the Hilton Head Area Realtors and the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors, stated April 19th, 2021. And the subject is both the county coastal resilience overlay zone and also the fill standards. Dear Chairman Howard, members of the Beaufort County Natural Resource Committee, and members of council and staff, on behalf of the 1,800 plus realtors and affiliate members of the Hilton Head Area Realtors and the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors, we express our opposition to the proposed Coastal Resilience Overlay Zone standards, known as CRO, and our concerns over the proposed fill standards. The associations are concerned that the disclosure requirements of the CRO ordinance are unnecessary and redundant to existing standard practice real estate disclosure. The CRO ordinance may be susceptible to claims that its disclosure requirements are preempted by the South Carolina Residential Property Condition Disclosures Act. Because South Carolina has a state statute that addresses disclosure requirements in residential property transactions, there might be challenges to the disclosure requirements of the CRO ordinance on the grounds of preemption. In particular, the South Carolina Residential Property Condition Disclosures Act, the SC Disclosure Act, appears to require an owner selling real property to disclose certain information in a written disclosure statement provided to the purchaser of the property. In addition, pursuant to this South Carolina Disclosure Act, the South Carolina Real Estate Commission has created the South Carolina Residential Property Condition Disclosure Statement, known as the State Disclosure Statement, which requires the seller of residential property to answer yes, no, or no representation to each and a list of required disclosures established by Section 27-50-40 of the South Carolina Disclosure Act. These required disclosure topics include flood hazards, wetlands or flood hazard designations, flood insurance, and erosion or erosion control affecting the property. Furthermore, requiring that the CRO disclosure form be provided at closing would not further the ordinance's stated purpose of assisting individuals in making decisions that involve investments that will last at least 30 years in light of the projected coastal flooding conditions in that time frame. If the intent of the CR ordinance is to address the inadequacy of current disclosure requirements for timely evaluation of sea level rise and coastal flooding risk in real estate transaction, requiring that the CRO district disclosure be delivered at closing does not give a prospective buyer an opportunity to adequately evaluate those risks. By the time a real estate transaction reaches the closing, the parties have already negotiated a purchase price and presumably are contractually obligated through a purchase and sale agreement to proceed with the transaction, but for certain contingencies. The buyer has also presumably already purchased insurance that will become effective upon closing. The disclosure might educate a buyer about potential flooding risks, but only at a point in the transaction where the buyer may have little or no practical recourse. By contrast, the South Carolina Disclosure Act requires that a seller provide a written disclosure before a real estate contract is signed by the purchaser and owner, unless the real estate contract stated otherwise. By requiring that the required disclosures be made before entering a real estate contract, the South Carolina Disclosure Act gives buyers ample time to make an informed purchase decision. The CRO ordinance, by contrast, requires that the disclosure be given too late to serve its intended purpose. Section 3.4.90C1 of the CRO ordinance says that the buyer, seller, and witness must sign the CRO disclosure form. However, the CRO ordinance is unclear with regard to whether the property owner or the listing agent is responsible for ensuring that the CRO disclosure is properly signed and recorded. By contrast, the South Carolina Disclosure Act expressly requires that the listing agent or any real estate licensee inform in writing the property owner of their obligation to provide a prospective purchaser with a disclosure statement. It also states that once the listing agent performs this duty, he or she cannot be held liable for the owner's failure to deliver the disclosure statement. Question: does the county intend to provide property owners with an accurate, reliable, and accessible means of determining whether the elevation of their property places it within the CRO district? The CRO ordinance establishes a CRO district that encompasses all property at the elevation of 10 feet or less and imposes disclosure obligations on that basis. The fill ordinance also applies only to land with an elevation of 10 feet or less. Each of these ordinances specifies that the relevant standard for determining whether a property is at elevation 10 feet or less is the North American vertical datum of 1988. It is unclear whether the county intends to make available to property owners an accessible and reliable source of information regarding the exact elevation of property based on the North American vertical datum of 1988. While the county apparently does have a public GIS mapping site, it does not appear to include either a base map or a layer that contains the North American vertical datum of 1988 data. The county's GIS mapping tool does include an elevation map, but it appears to depict 2013 digital elevation data, not the North American vertical datum of 1988 standard used by the CRO ordinance and fill ordinance. The elevation map uses a gradient color scale to depict elevation ranging from 50 feet above sea level to a low of 7 feet below sea level. This type of mapping will not be precise or detailed enough for use in determining with certainty whether a particular property is in the CRO district. In contrast, for example, firms clearly, this abbreviation, clearly delineate flood hazards associated with property and are on a scale that makes it possible to see whether and to what extent a particular property falls within a flood hazard zone, enabling parties to a real estate transaction to determine whether flood insurance is required. Does the county intend to map the proposed CRO district, and if not, how does it expect owners to determine whether their property is located within the CRO district and therefore is subject to the CRO ordinance and the fill ordinance? Without an accurate, detailed, and reliable source of elevation data, property owners would be forced to incur the cost of a professional survey or elevation certificate to determine whether the CRO ordinance applies. This could add additional costs and complication to property transactions and might discourage some residential rental property owners from entering into written leases with their tenants. Issues raised by the fill ordinance. The fill ordinance would arbitrarily limit the amount of fill permitted on a site rather than focusing on the actual impact of the use of the fill on the site's drainage patterns. Rather than focusing on the actual impact of the use of fill on a site's drainage patterns, the fill ordinance proposes a one-size-fits-all approach that simply limits the use of fill to a maximum of 3 vertical feet with an area of development. Unlike the fill ordinances adopted by many seaside communities, the proposed fill ordinance focuses exclusively on the amount of fill added to the site rather than taking into consideration factors such as post-development infiltration and absorption performance in evaluating the impact of fill. The county should focus on enforcement and refinement of existing flood damage prevention ordinance rather than adopting a new and potentially inconsistent set of regulations. The county has already adopted a flood damage prevention ordinance that is designed to control filling, grading, dredging, and other development which may increase erosion or flood damage. It appears that the flood damage prevention ordinance already regulates the use of fill in special flood hazard areas and the use of landscaping/aesthetic fill in coastal high hazard areas. Special flood hazard areas are defined as land with a 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year. For example, a 100-year flood. According to the Beaufort County Sea Level Rise Adaptation Report, 2/3 of the county's dry land is located within a flood zone. Under the flood damage prevention ordinance, the use of fill in floodways is prohibited unless it's been demonstrated through hydraulic analysis performed in accordance with standard engineering practices that the proposed encroachment would not result in any increase in flood levels during the occurrence of the base flood. This standard appears to allow for consideration of a site's infiltration and absorption characteristics. The applicability of the fill ordinance and the flood damage prevention ordinance presumably will overlap in many instances since the county's flood hazard areas would include land 10 feet below sea level or less. The fill ordinance does not address coordination with the flood damage prevention ordinance or how the fill ordinance would be applied in cases where the requirements of the fill ordinance are inconsistent with the requirements of the flood damage prevention ordinance. It appears that the fill ordinance would be administered by the Director of Community Development, while the flood damage prevention ordinance is administered by the Building Department at the development permit or building permit stage. As a result, it appears that any development requiring the use of fill would be subject to 2 separate and seemingly unconnected review processes administered by 2 separate departments, which could add delay and expense to the development permitting process. Why does the county believe it is necessary or appropriate to adopt the fill ordinance to limit the use of fill within the CRO district rather than amending the flood damage prevention ordinance to incorporate the additional regulatory requirements of the fill ordinance? The county should consider providing developers with incentives to encourage the use of best stormwater management practices. Unlike the fill ordinance, some stormwater management ordinances provide a variety of incentives to encourage developers to voluntarily use innovative stormwater best management practices. We urge the county to consider providing developers with incentives, such as an expedited permit processing, discounted fees, and density bonuses to encourage the use of best stormwater management practices rather than adopting the fill ordinance. It should also be noted that neither of the ordinances proposed are being considered by the town of Hilton Head or the town of Bluffton. Passage of the ordinances would cause a patchwork of regulations in Beaufort County and a confusing situation for property owners and developers. As previously stated, we are strongly opposed to the proposed Coastal Resilience Overlay Zone, CRO, standards and have concerns over the proposed fill standards. We thank you for consideration of our views. We look forward to working with you to prevent unintended consequences to property owners across Beaufort County. It's signed by Sean McInton, who's the president of the Hilton Head Area Realtors, and Bob Bundy, who's the president of the Beaufort Jasper County Realtors. And thank you for listening to that. It's also included in our packet. At this time, we're not going to be taking up those ordinances, and there's going to be some subsequent meetings with both this group and some other groups as we work through this process.
There's a phone number online. I don't know if you want to see if that's somebody for public comment.
Oh, okay. We have other public comment? How do we?
You just ask if there's anybody else.
Oh, is there any other public comment? There is a phone number of someone who's dialed in. They're on mute. Would that person like to make public comment? Okay. Okay, or identify themselves? All right. Okay, I guess not at this time. Number 7 on the agenda is a contract extension for Phase 2 planning services to Wood and Partners for completion of the civil and architect plans for Whitehall Park. And Ms. Naggett is going to present this.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
In summer of 2019, which seems so long ago now, we put out a bid to RFP for initial planning services for Whitehall Park to do a conceptual master plan. That bid did include a provision to allow the selected bidder to provide a proposal for the Phase 2 planning services, which does include the civil and architect plans, as well as going through the permitting for development, geotechnical investigation, and construction oversight. So Wood and Partners, having provided an acceptable and above average product, we asked them to go ahead and provide that proposal for Phase 2 services. They did provide an acceptable proposal based on market value, like market pricing for those services, and we would like to extend their contract or enter into the Phase 2 planning contract, which will encumber $136,900 for those. In 2019, also, County Council did approve a total of $600,000 from the rural and critical bond funds to be used towards Whitehall Park planning and construction. To date, we have only expended just over $28,000 of those funds, so we do have enough money left over in that to do these Phase 2 planning services, as well as to be used towards construction when we get to that point to bid out that.
Okay.
So staff does recommend approval of the contract extension. The purchasing director has approved this to move forward as well. And we would like to ask the Natural Resource Committee to make a motion to recommend to council approval of this contract
Okay.
for next week.
Let's open it up for questions if there's any before we entertain a motion, please. Any questions?
I
No?
want to make a motion whenever. you're
Okay.
ready.
Any questions?
Councilmember Glover.
Oh, Councilmember Glover, please. Go ahead.
Yes, Stephanie, this kind of walked through $136,000, and then also $600,000 was budgeted for it. If 136 is being used, that's roughly a little over 20%, 25% is the remaining amount of money going to be justified at this time to complete. Kind of give me a feel for 136, that's all.
What do they got?
Plus,
Yes, sir.
comment about the remaining funding and what is expected to be completed.
Yes, sir. So the amount is definitely seems high, but we do have to hire professional engineers and architects. Architects charge quite a bit of money for their services. And so we also have in that budget accounting for the various permits. We'll have to go through the city of Beaufort for development permits. We also have to do geotechnical surveys for soil testing in order to make sure that the pervious materials we're putting on the ground are going to, work appropriately. So it does add up. It is actually one of the lower prices that I've seen on the projects I've been working on so far for these types of services. The remaining money will be used towards construction. However, I will need to submit an application, and I'm planning on submitting an application in December for an H-tax funding to help make up the difference so we can get the first 2 of 3 phases completed for the property, which would include the entrance, the parking, the multi-use pathway that connects to the boardwalk. The city of Beaufort just got approval to build, as well as some of the picnic tables and walking trails and benches. And then phase 3 would be the pier and the dock and an observation platform, which are going to be quite a bit more money because of the price of wood, as well as the other permitting aspects with that regarding waterfront permitting through DHEC. So right now we're looking at finishing the phase 2 planning by the end of this calendar year, and then bidding out the project in January of next year for construction. We do have the bald eagle nest that we have to take into consideration, and so our construction timeline is very tight, and it can only occur between May and September of any given year, since the bald eagles start nesting from October to May, essentially.
Now, is the bald eagle nest on our property,
Yes, sir.
or is it just an area? It's on ours?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, we've also spent, about $700,000 for the boardwalk coming off the bridge, right?
The boardwalk off the bridge is a City of Beaufort project. I'm not involved in that one. I think Jared may have been, I know Rob McPhee was involved before he left, so Jared may have picked that up, Jared Fralix.
It may be their project, but we have actually funded it.
I know that.
So, I mean, yeah, it's their project, but we funded it. So it's still our money, their project, and that leads to my question. And the other final question is, you mentioned A-tax, so you're probably going to be putting an application for A-tax funding from us. How much money is the city of Beaufort is going to put into this thing?
The City of Beaufort is doing maintenance of the property as of July 1 this year. So that's their contribution is full maintenance for the grounds and minor repairs and needs.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from committee members or council members? I don't see anyone's hand raised. I'll entertain a motion. Councilman Somerville?
So moved.
Okay. Do I have a second? Second?
I have to second it, so I'll second it.
All right, thank you, Councilman Glover. All in favor of recommending this to the full council, the contract extension for Phase 2 planning services to Wood & Partners? Any objection or exception? I hear none. Okay. So this passes without exception to move this forward to the full council. Okay, thank you, Ms. Amy.
Good job.
Very good, thank you. All right, next on the agenda, we have an appointment to the Zoning Board of Appeals. We have 2 names in the queue. One, Gail Murray, and then another person, Daniel Rydell. Do I have a nomination for this?
Madam Chairman, I move that we appoint Ms. Gail Murray to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right, Councilman I heard Councilman Passament, second. All right, let's do a vote. All in favor? Raise your hand. Okay? That's unanimous. All right, thank you. The next one is number 9, appointment of Gerard Hoffman to the Southern Beaufort County Coordinator Beautification Committee. He lives in District 5. It's the first term, expires in 2025. This is Brian Fwelling's district, a rep from his district, I get, on the Southern Corridor. Do I hear a nomination? Okay, Councilman Somerville.
I'll make the motion. I don't know. Brian's not on the call. I assume that he's this satisfactory with him. I don't know.
Well, this will move it forward to full council.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's
Yeah.
just move it forward.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, Councilman Glover, second. All in favor of moving this forward to full council? Show of hands, please. Do we need to do, okay. All right, it's unanimous. Okay. All right, at this time, we need to go in executive session. That's number 10, pursuant to South Carolina Code 30-4-72, discussion of negotiations incident to proposed contractual arrangements and proposed sale of purchase of property through the Rural and Critical Lands Program. And then also out of executive session is legal advice pending the threatened or potential claim or other matter covered by attorney-client privilege, settlement of legal claims, or the position of the public agency and other adversary situations involving the assertion against the agency or a claim. I have a motion to go in executive session, please.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, Councilman Glover made the motion and Councilman Dawson second. All right, without exception, we will now go into executive session. And we may come back if there are matters arising out of executive session. Thank you.
second it to Gerald when you get through.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's due diligence for 2 individual properties as discussed in executive session,
Not
not to exceed $50,000 for the due diligence for both properties.
Okay. You okay? Everybody okay with that?
For
All right.
each property, not both properties.
Right.
Each property.
Right, for each property. And you don't have to, please, we don't want to describe them or anything at this point.
No.
All right.
You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
We're good? All right. The Natural Resources Committee is out of executive session, and we have an item coming out of executive session. Do I hear a motion? Councilman Dawson?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I would move that we approve the rule and critical to move forward with the due diligence for each property. We discussed 2 properties in the executive session, that they move forward with the 2 properties that we discussed to do the due diligence on, not to exceed $50,000 each.
For each project. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Yeah, I second that, Madam Chairman.
All right, Councilman Glover. Do we, let's vote on that by a show of hands, please. All in favor? Okay, is unanimous
Well,
from
we couldn't see
vision?
Mr. Dawson, hold on.
We can't see Mr. Dawson, but he made the motion.
He's got his hand,
Yeah, all
There
right.
we go.
Okay,
There we
this
go.
is unanimous. So this passes, and there being no further business, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Can we get both motions?
Thank you, Madam.
We only did one, we did
Oh,
them
okay.
together.